Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is a pro-revenge story. Landlords are jerks, generally speaking. Everyone knows that. But if you think residential landlords are bad, they're nothing compared to commercial landlords. Landlords of commercial buildings are some of the most ruthless, coldest people I've ever dealt with. This revenge story is about a commercial landlord and how I handled him. Back in 2015, I'd often grab lunch at this restaurant in the basement of our building. The place was called the Iron Door because it had this massive bank vault that had always been there, from way before the place became a restaurant. The vault was so enormous they could fit several tables inside, and customers could eat their meals surrounded by rows of old, gleaming safe deposit boxes. One day during my usual lunch visit, Marcus, the owner, pulled me aside with a worried look on his face. "The landlord's making my life hell," he said, running his hands through his graying hair. "That sounds like typical Richard behavior," I replied, referring to our notorious landlord. "He makes everyone's life hell." I was a subtenant in the same building, sharing space with an older lawyer, David, and the landlord was constantly causing us grief. I'd already had several confrontations with him, and we despised each other from the start. "What's he doing now?" I asked Marcus as we moved to a quieter corner of the restaurant. "He keeps hitting me with these ridiculous charges for extra rent," Marcus explained, pulling out a crumpled letter from his pocket. "And the weird thing is, a lot of it's from ages ago." I looked over the demand notice the landlord had served him earlier that day. The list included expenses for snow removal, parking lot maintenance, common area renovations, and all sorts of nonsense dating back years. At the bottom was Richard's favorite threat: he'd change the locks if the tenant didn't comply with his demands. "From the way this is written, looks like this fight's been going on for a while," I said, studying the document. "Why didn't you talk to a lawyer sooner?" Marcus sighed heavily. "I did talk to someone, Mike Harris. He said it was hopeless. I knew Harris. He had a struggling real estate practice and had resorted to taking whatever small legal aid cases he could find when the market crashed in 2008. "Did you do something specific to get on Richard's bad side?" I asked. "Even for him, this seems excessive." "He found out I'm relocating the restaurant," Marcus said, slumping in his chair. "I think he's trying to squeeze every penny he can before I leave. Plus, there's this whole mess with the vault." "What, he won't let you take it?" I asked with a hint of sarcasm. Marcus let out a bitter laugh. "Are you kidding? The thing weighs nearly 100 tons. I don't even want it. But according to the lease, I have to remove it and restore the building to its original condition before there was a vault. That would cost a fortune. Richard's threatening to sue if I leave it behind." "Send your lease up to my office," I said. "Let me take a look." I finished my lunch, and when I got back upstairs, the lease was waiting on my desk. The situation was exactly as bad as Marcus had described. The lease was a complicated mess of renewals and assignments, with the original documents dating back to right after World War II, when a bank first leased the space and installed the vault. Somehow Richard had managed to trap Marcus into inheriting a lease that made him responsible for removing a massive bank vault when he moved out. My first thought was simple: no problem, the restaurant can default and all Richard can do is sue a shell company. But when I reached the final page of the lease, I discovered the guarantee clause. Marcus had personally guaranteed the lease, meaning he was personally responsible for removing a 100-ton vault and renovating the space. The cost would be astronomical. The case seemed hopeless at first glance. That much was clear. But then I thought about Richard with his endless demands, threats, and rent hikes, and an idea started forming. I picked up my phone and called Marcus. "It's bad news, right?" he answered, resignation in his voice. "You're calling to tell me there's no way out. That's what Mike already said. I just thought I'd get a second opinion." "Actually, I can help you," I said, "but it's going to cost." "How much are we talking about?" "5,000 for legal fees, plus another 1,000 for an agent." "Agent? What kind of agent are we talking about?" "Real estate. Get me a certified check and I'll handle everything else." The check arrived at my office within the hour. I walked over to David's office. "Know any good real estate agents?" I asked. "You buying a house?" He looked up from his paperwork. "Nope." "Selling one?" "Nope." After sharing office space with David for almost 5 years, he knew my methods pretty well. "You're planning something sneaky, aren't you?" he asked, a knowing smile on his face. "Maybe, but nothing that'll get you in trouble." David reached for his ancient Rolodex and flipped through it. "I know just the person," he said. David knew all kinds of people, which eventually led to his disbarment, but that's another story. He gave me the agent's contact information and I met with them the next day. We discussed what I needed, agreed on terms, and I handed over the necessary paperwork and fee. A few days later, I was back at the Iron Door for lunch. Marcus spotted me as soon as I walked in. "Richard's here," he whispered urgently. "Why?" Having lunch and being his usual charming self, Marcus said with an eye roll. Let's sit in the vault room so we don't have to look at him. He led me to the vault, and with the heavy door nearly closed, we had our discussion over plates of perfectly cooked pasta and glasses of red wine. We've made a demand on Richard, I said between bites of my linguine. What kind of demand? I pulled out a document and passed it across the table. We're demanding that he release all the restaurant equipment and fixtures, the ovens, freezers, ventilation system, everything you need to run a restaurant. But the lease already covers all that stuff, Marcus pointed out, confused. He can't stop me from taking what's mine. The only issue is the vault, which I don't even want. I shook my head. Trust me, you need the vault, I said. We're demanding he let you remove it within 7 business days. Wait, what? Marcus stared at me. You think reverse psychology will work on Richard? Like he's some kind of toddler you can manipulate? We'll see soon enough. He's had the demand letter for a couple of days now. Marcus knocked over his wine glass, and it shattered on the marble floor. You already sent it? He exclaimed, jumping up to call a waiter for cleanup. Let's go see what our friend Richard has to say, I suggested, and we walked over to his table. Richard was a large man with an equally large appetite. He sat alone, tearing into a massive steak with both hands. My client needs an answer today, I announced. Richard looked up, mouthful of meat. I'm representing the Iron Door, I continued. You received our demand letter. My client needs to know your position immediately. He needs the vault for his new location and has to make arrangements. Richard swallowed his mouthful and sneered. Your client can forget about the bank vault. You can't do that, I protested, feigning shock while Marcus's genuine surprise showed on his face. Richard's laugh boomed through the restaurant. I'm the landlord. I can do whatever I want. I'll need that in writing, I said. My client might have to take legal action. Sue all you want, Richard challenged, wiping his greasy hands on his napkin. You'll have my formal response by the end of the day. When his letter arrived, claiming ownership of the bank vault, I brought it straight to Marcus. How did you manage that? He asked, amazed. Professional secret, I replied with a smile. The following month, the Iron Door relocated to its new space 20 minutes away. They kept the name, but obviously didn't have the actual vault. The vault remained exactly where it had always been, in the basement of my building. Not long after, David caught me in the hallway. Richard's looking for you, he said. He's furious. Oh? What about? Says his deal fell through. He was supposed to lease the basement to a bank or credit union. They were scheduled to sign the lease but never showed up. And what's that got to do with me? I asked innocently, and repeated the same question to Richard when he cornered me a few days later. This was all you, he accused, face red with anger. That offer from the agent, it was all fake. Just a trick to make me keep the vault so your client could abandon it and walk away. I'm going to sue everyone involved. If you're looking for legal representation, I'll have to declare a conflict of interest, I replied calmly. I'm suing the restaurant, the agent, and you, he threatened before storming off. But Richard never filed that lawsuit. Of course he didn't. He had no contract to sue on, just a vague letter of intent that I'd carefully drafted. Enough to hook a greedy landlord who was used to getting his way. The offer was non-binding and required a formal lease signing that never happened. When I left David's practice a year later, the basement space was still empty, with a faded "For Rent" sign hanging in the window and a 100-ton vault sitting exactly where it belonged. The next one is an entitled People's Story. I never thought I'd be writing one of these stories, but here I am. This happened over the course of the last 3 months, and I'm still shaking my head at the absurdity of it all. Buckle up, because this is a wild ride of HOA overreach and sweet, sweet justice. My wife Rose and I bought our dream house last year. It's a beautiful property just outside of Phoenix with a decent-sized backyard and, most importantly, a pool. Anyone who's lived through an Arizona summer knows that a pool isn't just a luxury. It's practically a necessity when temperatures regularly hit 110 degrees Fahrenheit. Our house sits right next to one of those cookie-cutter planned communities with their matching beige houses and perfectly manicured lawns. You know the type, where the HOA measures your grass with a ruler and sends you violation notices if your mailbox is the wrong shade of brown. We specifically chose our property because it wasn't part of any HOA. I've heard enough horror stories to know I wanted no part of that nightmare. Everything was perfect for the first 8 months. We maintained our pool ourselves, kept the yard nice, but not obsessively so, and generally enjoyed our freedom. Then came Karen from next door, and yes, that's her real name. It started with friendly suggestions about our pool maintenance schedule. You know, the HOA requires pools to be cleaned weekly, she'd say over the fence. Each time I politely reminded her that we weren't part of her HOA. She'd purse her lips, nod, and walk away. I thought that was the end of it. Boy, was I wrong. One Saturday morning in June, I was enjoying my coffee by the pool when someone started pounding on my front door. I opened it to find a man in a polo shirt with pool safety solutions embroidered on it, clipboard in hand. "Good morning. I'm Mark Harris from Pool Safety Solutions. I'm here for your mandatory pool inspection," he announced with all the authority of someone who actually had authority. I blinked at him. "Mandatory pool inspection? Says who?" "The Saguaro Vista HOA has contracted us to perform safety inspections on all pools within the community," he replied, already trying to peer around me into the backyard. "Well, there's your first problem," I said. "We're not part of Saguaro Vista HOA, never have been." Mark consulted his clipboard. "According to my records, 2487 Desert Willow Lane is within HOA jurisdiction." "That's not even my address. I'm 2485 and again, not part of the HOA. He frowned. "Ma'am, refusing a safety inspection could result in fines and pool closure. I need to complete this inspection today." Now I was getting annoyed. "Look, I don't know who sent you, but you have no authority here. I'm not in the HOA, and you're not coming into my backyard. Have a nice day." I started to close the door. He stuck his foot in the doorway. "I'm afraid I have to insist." That's when I lost it. "Remove your foot from my door right now, or I'm calling the police to report you for trespassing." He pulled his foot back, but his face turned red. "You'll be hearing from the HOA board about this." "Looking forward to it," I replied, and shut the door in his face. I immediately called the police non-emergency line to report the incident, just to have it on record. Then I installed a security camera system that afternoon, something I'd been meaning to do anyway. Good thing I did, because things were about to get much worse. 2 days later, I received a certified letter from Saguaro Vista Homeowners Association stating that I was in violation of multiple pool safety regulations and had 48 hours to comply or face daily fines of $250. They even threatened to place a lien on my property. I couldn't help but laugh at their audacity. I took the letter to my home office and pulled up my property records, deed, and the county GIS maps showing property boundaries. Then I called my lawyer, James, who'd helped us with the closing. "They're doing what now?" James asked after I explained the situation. "Trying to enforce their rules on my property. I've got everything documented. The harassment from the neighbor, the attempted forced entry by their inspector, and now this letter. Send me everything you have. This is textbook harassment, and they have zero jurisdiction over your property. We'll shut this down quick." James drafted a cease and desist letter that basically told the HOA to pound sand, complete with detailed property maps and legal citations. He also included a warning that any further harassment would result in legal action. But the HOA wasn't done yet. The next weekend, I woke up to find a pool closed sign stuck in my front yard and yellow caution tape wrapped around my pool fence. The security cameras caught Karen and another board member putting them up at 6 a.m. I called James again. "They're trespassing now." "Perfect," he said. "That's exactly what we needed. Time to play hardball." James filed a civil lawsuit against the HOA, Karen personally, and Pool Safety Solutions for harassment, trespassing, and attempting to exercise authority over property outside their jurisdiction. He also filed for an emergency restraining order to keep them off my property. The day after the HOA was served with the lawsuit, I got a visit from a very different kind of suit, their lawyer. He was a lot more reasonable than his clients. "Mrs. Mitchell, I've reviewed your documentation and it appears there's been a serious misunderstanding," he said, mopping his brow in the Arizona heat. "A misunderstanding? Your clients trespassed on my property, tried to force their way into my home, and attempted to exercise authority they don't have. That's not a misunderstanding. That's harassment." He nodded. "I've advised the board that they have no jurisdiction over your property and that their actions were inappropriate and potentially illegal. They're prepared to offer a settlement." "I'm listening. The initial offer was a joke. They wanted me to sign an agreement not to pursue legal action in exchange for them leaving me alone. You know, the thing they legally had to do anyway. I counteroffered through James. They would pay my legal fees, $3,500 at that point, pay for my security camera system, $1,200, make a public apology at their next board meeting admitting they had no authority over non-HOA properties, and add a clear statement to their bylaws specifically listing which properties were and weren't under their jurisdiction. They tried to negotiate, but James had them dead to rights with the video evidence of trespassing and harassment. The fact that Karen was a real estate agent who definitely should have known better about property boundaries made their position even weaker. After 2 weeks of back and forth, they agreed to everything except the public apology. Instead, they would send a written apology and clarification to all HOA members. Fine by me. I just wanted this nonsense over with. The letter went out to all Saguaro Vista residents the following week. It was beautiful. The board wishes to clarify that properties outside the designated HOA boundaries, including 2485 Desert Willow Lane, are not subject to HOA regulations or oversight. Recent attempts to enforce HOA rules on this property were inappropriate and unauthorized. The board apologizes for any confusion or inconvenience this may have caused. Karen put her house up for sale a month later. Apparently, being forced to admit you harassed your neighbors and cost the HOA thousands in legal fees isn't great for your position on the board. Who knew? The best part? We used the settlement money to upgrade our pool with a new heating system and LED lights. Every evening when those lights come on, they remind me that sometimes standing your ground pays off. As for the HOA, they've been surprisingly quiet lately. The new board even sent out guidelines specifically stating that they have no authority over non-HOA properties, and that members should not attempt to enforce HOA rules outside their boundaries. I did get one last certified letter from them last week. I opened it with my lawyer on speakerphone, just in case. But it was just the final settlement check for the legal fees and a copy of their updated bylaws with the new boundary clarifications. James laughed when I read it to him. "Keep that letter," he said. "It's not often you get an HOA to admit they were wrong in writing." The whole experience taught me a few valuable lessons. 1. Document everything. Those security cameras paid for themselves many times over. 2. Know your property rights and don't be afraid to defend them. 3. Get a good lawyer who knows how to handle HOA disputes. 4. Sometimes the best revenge is simply forcing people to face the consequences of their actions. Rose and I still love our house, and our pool is better than ever. We even hosted a pool party last weekend. Properly maintained according to our standards, not the HOA's. A few of our neighbors from the HOA properties came by, including the new board president. She actually apologized in person for the whole mess and assured me nothing like that would happen again. As I write this, I'm sitting by my pool, enjoying the warm Arizona evening. The LED lights are cycling through their colors, and I can see Karen's for sale sign glowing in the streetlight. Sometimes justice doesn't just feel good, it looks pretty damn beautiful too. Update 3 months later. A lot of you have been asking for an update, so here it is. Things have gotten even more interesting since my last post. Remember how Karen put her house up for sale? Well, she had trouble selling it. Turns out, when you're a real estate agent who gets caught harassing neighbors and costing your HOA thousands in legal fees, it doesn't do great things for your reputation in the local real estate community. She finally sold her house last month for well under asking price and moved to a different part of town. But here's where it gets good. The new neighbors are absolutely wonderful. They're a retired couple who specifically asked their real estate agent, not Karen, about the HOA situation because they'd heard rumors about the previous board's overreach. When they learned about what happened, they actually came over on moving day to introduce themselves and assure us they believed in being good neighbors, not nosy neighbors. The HOA has undergone some major changes too. After the whole fiasco, there was basically a clean sweep of the board. The new members are much more reasonable and they've implemented some pretty significant reforms. 1. They created a clear map of HOA boundaries that's now included in all new resident welcome packets too. They established a formal process for handling complaints that requires actual documentation and verification before any action is taken. 3. They even started a good neighbor initiative to improve relationships with non-HOA properties on the periphery of their community. The best part? They used my case as a learning opportunity. At their annual meeting, which I know about because my new neighbors told me, they actually discussed how the previous board's actions had damaged community relations and wasted HOA funds. They used it as an example of why it's important to verify jurisdiction and follow proper legal procedures before taking action. Pool Safety Solutions, the company that sent Mark Harris to my house, also faced some consequences. After our lawsuit, they implemented new training procedures for their inspectors and now require written verification of HOA jurisdiction before conducting any inspections. They sent me a formal apology letter and offered a free pool safety consultation as a goodwill gesture. I declined, but I appreciated the effort. Remember that security camera system the HOA had to pay for? It's come in handy in unexpected ways. Last month, it caught some kids trying to sneak into the pool late at night. Instead of calling the police or causing a scene, I talked to their parents, who live in the HOA section. We worked out an agreement where the kids can use the pool if they ask permission and have adult supervision. Sometimes being a good neighbor means finding solutions, not creating problems. The settlement money from the lawsuit didn't just pay for pool upgrades, it also funded a proper privacy fence along the HOA boundary. It's not spite fence tall, just high enough to clearly mark the property line and provide some privacy. I made sure it complied with all city codes, though notably not HOA regulations, and it's actually improved relations with the HOA properties because there's no more confusion about boundaries. James, my lawyer, has gotten some good business out of this too. Apparently, word spread about how he handled my case, and he's become something of a go-to lawyer for HOA disputes in the area. He jokes that he should put Karen's name on his website as a reference. The whole experience has had an unexpected positive impact on our little corner of the neighborhood. The clear boundaries and new HOA leadership have actually led to better community relations. We still have our independence, but there's also a mutual respect that wasn't there before. Last week, we even worked together with the HOA to organize a community yard sale that included both HOA and non-HOA properties. Rose and I have zero regrets about standing our ground. Yes, it was stressful at times, and yes, it cost some money up front, even though we got it back. But it was worth it to establish clear boundaries and rights. Sometimes you have to fight the small battles to prevent bigger ones down the road. Our pool is still our paradise, especially now that Arizona's summer is in full swing. We maintain it our way, on our schedule, and nobody gives us grief about it. The LED lights still shine every evening, but now they're less a symbol of victory and more just a beautiful part of our home. If there's one final lesson I've learned from all this, it's that standing up for your rights doesn't mean you have to maintain animosity forever. Once the people who were wrong are gone or have acknowledged their mistakes, it's possible to build something better than what was there before. Our neighborhood is proof of that. And to anyone else dealing with HOA overreach, document everything, know your rights, and don't be afraid to stand your ground. Sometimes the best way to be a good neighbor is to set clear boundaries and stick to them. The next one is a malicious compliances story. A former employer has decided to shoot themselves in the foot with a bazooka. I thought I'd share it here so you can laugh at them too. In a nutshell, the business built its own in-house software which is designed to cover all aspects of the business, from invoicing, tracking stock, creating reports, semi-automating direct debit billing, and virtually everything else. 1,000 sub-areas. As such, the business ended up with 3 IT departments. One was more hardware issues and basic IT issues. There was the medium IT department who could fix small issues within specific sub-areas of the software, and the legacy team who worked on the rawest base level of the software and had kept it functioning for over 20 years. In an effort to cut costs, the senior management decided that the legacy team were no longer required as they were creating a whole new software anyway and would be ditching the old one within a year or so. In doing so, they also insisted that the large office they occupied was completely emptied. This included several huge filing cabinets of paperwork, comprising dozens of core manuals and countless hundreds of up-to-date how-to-fix documentation pieces, as well as earlier superseded documents they could refer back to too. The legacy team sent an email to the seniors basically saying, "Are you sure?" To which they eventually received a terse email back specifically stating to destroy all paperwork. They were also ordered to delete all digital files to free up a rather substantial amount of space on the shared drive and wipe their computers back to factory settings. So it was all shredded, the files erased totally, and the computers wiped. The team removed every trace of their existence as ordered and left for greener pastures. It's been 3 months, and there was recently a power outage which has broken something in the rebooted system. The company can no longer add items into stock, which means invoicing won't work, as the system reads as "can't sell what we don't have." In turn, this means there's no invoices for the system to bill. So it's back to pen, paper, and shared Excel sheets to keep track of stock, manually typing invoices into a template, and having to manually check every payment received against paper invoices. All of which is resulting as massive amounts of overtime required to keep up with demand. The company has reached out to the legacy team, but they've all said, without the manuals they were ordered to destroy or erase, they're not sure how to fix it. The new system is still at least a year out. On the positive side, 2 of the senior managers have a nice large office to share and sit in. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.